You know that moment when everything veers off its usual path? It's often just a harmless-looking turn. The black SUV sped past 2 rows of red brick houses and suddenly blinked left at the 3rd intersection, instead of going straight 1 more block to the pharmacy, like it had for the past 14 years. I froze in the passenger seat, my palm gripping the seat belt until my knuckles turned white. "Dan, why are you changing the route?" I asked hoarsely, trying to stay calm. Daniel kept staring straight ahead. His jaw clenched so tight the answer seemed trapped behind his teeth. The back seat stayed silent, but the plot spoke loudly. Poking out from Rachel's leather handbag was the corner of a lottery ticket, laminated and neat. The ticket had once been crumpled like a napkin, the very one I bought Monday afternoon. Now it looked pristine, valuable. "We're just stopping somewhere before the pharmacy, Dad," Daniel said softly, trying to sound casual. I glanced out the window. A white sign stood out among the magnolias. Willow Creek Senior Care, compassionate living every day. My heart skipped a beat. The SUV slid through the stone gate and eased to a stop on the gravel drive. The main door opened instantly. 2 attendants in blue scrubs stepped out, their movements rehearsed. Daniel turned off the engine, faced me fully, and forced a smile thinner than paper. "You'll stay here for a while, just to keep an eye on your health. The room's ready, the doctor's waiting." No joking, no shame, just tired. Foggy eyes try to shed the weight of blood ties. Rachel opened the door, bowed her head, and said quickly, "Just a few weeks, Dad. We really have something urgent." I hadn't even reacted yet when the attendants came around, gently holding my arms as if I'd just slipped and fallen. The scent of disinfectant floated in the early summer breeze. The SUV turned around. Tires crunched on gravel, then faded away. I stood alone in the polished wood lobby, clutching my faded baseball cap. At the reception desk, an intake form had my name pre-printed, Daniel's signature right beside it. The image of Rachel carefully checking the numbers on that lottery ticket flickered through my mind. $17 million. A number now big enough to wipe away all sense of decency. Room 205 was waiting. A white-painted metal bed, a small wooden cabinet, a window overlooking a neatly trimmed lawn. I set my cap down on the table, gently touched the bare crown of my head, and understood. Sometimes, people don't say goodbye to their aging father. They just change the route and let the staff do the rest. But their little game had just begun. And I, the man who bought that ticket, was just getting started too. My name is Harold Bennett. I'm 76 years old. And for most of my life, I believed I had raised a good son. Daniel is my only child. After he married Rachel 13 years ago, I did what many widowed fathers in this town have done. I gave him the house, the one I'd lived in for nearly 40 years, as a wedding gift. No paperwork, no conditions, just a simple blessing for their new life. Daniel wasn't the kind of son anyone had to worry about. In fact, as a boy, neighbors often spoke of him with pride. That Bennett boy, so polite, so hard-working, such a caring son. I remember the foggy winter mornings when I was still fumbling for my wool cap before heading to the mill, and Daniel had already set a warm cup of coffee next to my forgotten lunchbox. No words, no praise needed. My wife passed away when Daniel was just 15. A sudden stroke took the woman who used to hum softly in the kitchen every morning. After that day, the house felt powerless. No more laughter. No more smell of cinnamon waffles. No one to remind me to take my heart pills. Just the 2 of us, and the quiet that stretched from day to day. We didn't cry in each other's arms, or talk about our grief out loud. Instead, every weekend, Daniel and I would fix the old lawnmower, repaint a rickety table, or go to the hardware store for new screws. Small things, but they kept us close. He never asked why I still kept that broken wristwatch, the one his mother gave me. Just like I never told him about the final night in the hospital when her hand turned cold in mine. When Daniel brought Rachel home, I saw his eyes light up for the first time in years. Rachel wasn't the bubbly, chatty type. She was reserved, a little distant, but the way Daniel pulled out her chair, or how his eyes followed her every movement, told me everything I needed to know. At first, things were peaceful. Rachel would sometimes bake chestnut cookies and call me down to eat with them. She asked how I liked my coffee. We had a few pleasant mornings together, sitting on the porch, watching the maples change color. But then, that warmth began to fade, like a mug of coffee left on a wooden table, steaming at first, then growing cold without notice. I began to notice Rachel closing the door every time she made a phone call. Fewer chairs at dinner, and fewer stories around the table. Daniel came home late, always saying, "Too much work at the plant." But his distant eyes told another story. And slowly, the words began to change. Gentle, never harsh, but sharp, like vinegar seeping into old wood. "Still using a flip phone, Dad? Looks kinda outdated. We're recalculating expenses. Might need to split the utilities starting next month. Have you thought about getting a memory test? You forgot little Grace's birthday last week." None of those words were cruel enough to make me angry, but each one felt like a tiny fracture. Not enough to bring down the house, but enough to make me feel off balance. I began to hear myself go quiet more than speak, and from that point on, I started keeping notes, not because I feared forgetting, but because I knew I was being tested. Not a memory test, but a test to see if I still counted as part of this home. I began withdrawing from our daily rhythms. No more fixing breakfast, no more Sunday church trips with them. I tucked myself away in the small room downstairs, where a few old engineering magazines and a worn-out cassette radio still remained. On that old magnetic tape, my wife's voice played, a recording from way back in 1992. Wishing my little boss a smooth workday. "Come home early, okay?" Every time I heard that line, something in my chest tightened. She was gone, but her voice remained. And my son, the boy who once placed a warm cup of coffee beside my lunchbox, was now the one escorting me out of my own home. One morning, almost as if prearranged, Daniel and Rachel helped me into the car, saying we were going to pick up medication. But when the SUV turned into the gate of Willow Creek Senior Care, and I saw two attendants in blue uniforms waiting at the entrance, I understood everything had been planned. In their hands was the crumpled lottery ticket I had bought with spare change at the Esso station that afternoon. A ticket worth $17 million. Room 214 sat at the end of the west hallway. Pale green walls, a single bed with crisp white sheets, a particle board desk beside the window, where morning light filtered through frosted glass, casting a soft yellow hue across the floor. In the distance, a wide lawn, with a few lavender bushes drying up with the season. On that first day, I simply sat on the edge of the bed, hands resting on the pillow, eyes staring out into the pale gray sky. The attendant brought medicine. I took it. Asked questions. I just nodded. But my eyes kept drifting toward somewhere else. The place where I once stood waiting for coffee to drip, where a young boy once placed his hand on his father's shoulder and said, "Hang in there, Dad." Lunch arrived on a plastic tray. Watery soup, a few slices of white bread. I ate a few spoonfuls, then pushed the tray aside. When I opened the door, I happened to catch a man's voice drifting from the room across the hall. "If they ask you to sign anything, don't rush. Read it 3 times, and make sure to ask for a copy." I turned my head. The door next to mine was slightly ajar. A silver-haired man, wearing a buttoned-up shirt, was wiping his glasses with a worn handkerchief. He noticed me, nodded slightly, and smiled. "Name's George Kramer. Used to be a lawyer, civil and estate law. Was supposed to be retired in Florida, but a minor stroke landed me here." I nodded back. That was the first real conversation I'd had since arriving at the nursing home. On the 3rd day, George came to find me in the small garden behind the facility. We talked about baseball, vintage radios, and slowly, the topic shifted to family. When I mentioned the lottery ticket, his brow furrowed slightly. "Do you remember exactly where you bought it? And did you write anything on the back?" "Esso gas station near Route 9. I always write H. Bennett in red ink on the back of each ticket. Old habit." George was silent for a few seconds, then nodded. "If you can pinpoint the purchase date, the location, and have proof the ticket was once in your possession, they might not get away with it after all." I turned to look at him, something flickering in my eyes. I thought it was all over. George chuckled softly, then replied, "For folks like us, things don't end when our hair turns white or our legs get weak. It ends when we stop wanting to reclaim what was once ours. And you remember the red ink on the back of that ticket. That means you're not ready to give up." That night, for the first time, I didn't turn on the radio. I sat in the quiet darkness, the hallway light casting a dim line through the door crack. My hand reached into the hidden pocket of an old notebook, the one I used to jot down daily tasks back at the mill. On 4th page, I stopped. The handwriting was messy but legible. Wednesday, June 7th, ticket number 84379, Esso Station, Route 9. Inside me, something stirred. Not hope, but survival instinct. The instinct of someone who now wanted to open the window with his own hands. 2 days later, George returned to the garden with an old manila envelope. Inside was a neatly clipped stack of papers. He laid it on the stone table, nodded at me, and spoke in a quiet but courtroom-clear voice. "I called an old friend. He runs a small law office on Parish Street now. I didn't give him the full story. Just asked him to look up the lottery records using the ticket number you remembered. And here's the good news. Ticket number 84379 is indeed the jackpot winner from the last draw. Even better, the prize hasn't been disbursed yet." I went quiet for a few seconds, then slowly asked, "Because they're still verifying who the rightful owner is?" George nodded, his eyes lighting up like dry paper, catching flame. "And now we have a reason to begin." George gave a slight smirk, his eyes glinting behind thin steel frames. "Exactly. They've put the payout on hold because there are discrepancies in the claim documents. Specifically, the name signed on the back of the ticket doesn't match the person who submitted the claim." I looked down at my hands. Thin fingers, rough from nearly half a century of swinging hammers, tightening bolts, adjusting machines, still steady enough to sign a claim form. Not trembling, not unsure. The next morning, George accompanied me to the administrative office of the nursing home. He didn't cause a scene, didn't raise his voice. He simply and calmly requested to review all documents I was said to have voluntarily signed upon admission. It took nearly an hour for the staff to dig them up and print everything. George waited patiently, then turned each page like a seasoned woodworker running his hand across a familiar surface. "Here." He pointed to the end of a power of attorney form, the signature tilted slightly. This was signed without a third-party witness. Legally invalid. He flipped to the next page, tapping his finger on a line of small printed text. "And here, there's no independent mental capacity assessment. Under Arkansas law, that makes this document unenforceable if there's suspicion of coercion or elder abuse." The facility manager, a middle-aged woman with glasses on a chain, looked momentarily flustered, her voice slightly offbeat. Well, his daughter-in-law came in rather abruptly. She said everything had been cleared with the family's private attorney. George smiled, but it never reached his eyes. "Perfect. Then let the real lawyer take a look." The next day, attorney Beth Martin arrived at the facility. She had represented me years ago in a land dispute over logging rights. A seasoned woman, one side of her hair silver, her shoulders a little stooped, but her stride still firm. Her voice was low and calm, as if nothing in the world could rush her. After I explained everything, from buying the ticket at the Esso station to the day I was brought here, Beth simply nodded once. "We have sufficient grounds to request civil court intervention. I'll file an emergency petition to freeze the prize money, and initiate an investigation into legal ownership of the ticket. You don't need to worry." George turned to me, his eyes carrying a message. "The game's not over yet, Harold. And this time, it's your turn to roll the dice." 1 week later, at a high-end boutique in the heart of the city, Rachel stood before a mirror, trying on a velvet red dress, the kind one wears to step onto a stage or appear on television. She smiled, twisting slightly to see her reflection from different angles. A sales assistant approached just as Rachel's phone rang. On the other end was a representative from the Arkansas State Lottery office, their voice clear and direct. "Ma'am, we have just received a formal claim of property misappropriation. Ticket number 84379 is now under freeze. All related disputes will be submitted to the county court, with hearings scheduled within the next 15 days. Rachel froze. Her hand trembled, and the red dress slipped from its hanger, falling onto the tiled floor. At that same moment, in the back garden of the nursing home, I sat beneath the shade of an old poplar tree, holding a cup of hot tea, watching morning light filter through the leaves. A breeze lifted a corner of the newspaper, and the faint scent of lavender drifted across my sweater. For the first time in months, I let out a quiet smile. The hearing was scheduled for a Wednesday morning. The sky was overcast, and a light breeze swept across the gray stone steps leading to the Benton County Courthouse. I wore my old gray suit, the one I wore to my wife's funeral over a decade ago. It was a bit tight around the shoulders and slightly faded, but the pleats were still sharp. George walked beside me, leaning on his ebony cane, slow but steady. His keen eyes, half hidden behind round glasses, missed nothing. I looked straight toward the open courthouse doors, and in my mind echoed my wife's voice from the old cassette tape. "Come home early." This time, I wasn't coming home early. I came right on time, to reclaim what was right. The courtroom carried a strange kind of silence, not tense, not noisy, but the stillness of something thoroughly prepared, waiting to be named. Rachel sat to the left, wearing a black dress past the knee, legs crossed modestly, her patent leather heels trembling ever so slightly. Daniel sat beside her, fingers entwined in his lap, head bowed low, never once looking up at me. The man who used to call me Dad now looked like a boy waiting to hear about a failing grade. On my side, Attorney Beth Martin flipped quickly through a thick folder and gave me a subtle nod, as if to say, "We're ready." The judge entered, a man in his 60s, silver hair cropped short, his face firm but not unkind. He adjusted the microphone and began in a clear, steady voice. "Today's matter concerns the rightful ownership of a lottery ticket valued at $17 million. According to the record, the plaintiff is Mr. Harold Bennett, age 76, currently residing at Willow Creek Senior Care." The room fell into deep silence. No sighs, no whispers, just the rhythmic tapping of a pen against the wooden desk. Beth stood. She didn't need to raise her voice. Her tone was calm, steady, the voice of someone long acquainted with the truth. "We submit the following. Lottery ticket number 84379 was purchased by Mr. Harold Bennett at the Esso gas station on June 7th. The station is located 3 miles from his residence. The ticket bears the signature H. Bennett on the reverse, written in red ink, specifically Pilot V5 pen, the same brand Mr. Bennett has used for over 15 years. The handwriting matches prior legal documents signed by Mr. Bennett." She placed an enlarged copy of the back of the ticket on the table. The red ink was bold, steady. Then she opened a file of evidence and projected surveillance images from the gas station. I was standing at the counter, ticket in hand. Undeniable, indisputable. Rachel sprang to her feet. Her voice cracked in the silence. "Buddy's old. His memory isn't reliable anymore." The judge tapped his gavel gently against the bench. "Are you asserting that he is mentally incapacitated?" Without waiting for Rachel to answer, Beth calmly continued. If that's the case, then all the power of attorney documents signed at the nursing facility would also be invalid by that same argument. The room fell into silence, not from tension, but from clarity. What needed to be said had been said. Rachel's lawyer attempted a rebuttal, but his words sounded like trying to patch a torn cloth. No evidence, no dates, no camera footage, no signature. They had excuses. We had the truth, written in red ink, signed by an old machinist who once believed his son was a good man. Finally, the judge raised the verdict and read aloud. The court hereby affirms that the ownership of lottery ticket number 84379 belongs to Mr. Harold Bennett. Prior submitted power of attorney documents are rendered invalid. The prize shall be transferred to its rightful owner. Court is adjourned. 3 weeks after the trial, the lottery winnings were transferred into a new account under my name, under the legal supervision of Beth Martin. On her computer screen, the number 17 million appeared, each digit glowing white on a blue background. I looked at it for a few seconds, then turned away. Not because I didn't need the money, but because I knew what I needed more was to be recognized, treated with fairness, and allowed to remain a man to the very end of my life. That afternoon, in the back garden of the nursing home, I turned on the old cassette radio again, but this time I didn't listen to my wife's voice. I listened to the wind, and it no longer felt cold. I left the nursing home on a gently sunny afternoon. No flowers, no farewells, just George walking beside me with his cane, a small bag slung loosely over his shoulder. We shared a ride to a small lakeside town near Crystal Lake, where I once camped with my wife in the fall of 1982, in the early days when we were broke but full of laughter. I remember she brought a red wool scarf, wrapping it around herself over and over, afraid of the cold, while I split firewood, eyes fixed on the sunset hitting the water. My new cabin sat tucked at the end of a dirt road, white painted, 2 bedrooms. On the porch, 2 iron chain swings hung, and in the yard stood an old maple tree, its bark rough like the calluses on my own hands, standing there like a silent guard. I didn't throw a party, didn't buy a new car, didn't travel the world. I replanted a few vegetable beds, kale, carrots, a bit of thyme. I fixed the leaking faucet under the sink. Every morning, I brewed 2 cups of tea, one for myself, one for George, the only old friend patient enough to sit for hours without needing to say much. I bought the house outright in my name. No debt, no joint ownership. Then I donated $2 million to a scholarship fund for mechanical engineering students at the local technical college, the same place I once hoped Daniel would attend before life took him elsewhere. Another $1 million I set aside for a nonprofit organization that provides legal aid to abused seniors. I told no one, didn't ask for my name to be etched on any donor wall. Daniel never called back. Rachel sent a short, cold, and formal text, a vague apology, no mention of the ticket, no question about where I was living. I didn't respond. Every afternoon, I sat on the porch, hot tea in hand, the old cassette radio beside me playing classic bluegrass, the raw banjo, the wistful harmonica echoing from a time long gone. The breeze swept through the porch, carrying the scent of fresh cut wood mixed with fallen maple leaves. Some days, I heard children riding their bikes beyond the gate. One boy, maybe 10, stopped and looked up at me with curious eyes. "You're the guy who won the lottery, right? How come you're not on TV or traveling the world like rich people do?" I just smiled. Not a big smile. Not for show. The kind of smile worn by someone who's seen enough glitter to know. What's worth keeping isn't the money. It's peace.